arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham tamham sangham namassami. All right, so the sutta begins. Bhikkhus, there are these 5 dangers in residing too long in the same place. What 5? 1 comes to own and accumulate many goods. 1 comes to own and accumulate many medicines. 1 takes on many tasks and duties and becomes competent in the various things to be done. 1 forms bonds with householders and monastics in an unsuitable way typical of lay people. And when 1 departs from that monastery, 1 departs full of concern. These are the 5 dangers in residing too long in the same place. Because there are these 5 benefits in residing for a balanced period in the same place. What 5? 1 does not come to own and accumulate many goods. 1 does not come to own and accumulate many medicines. 1 does not take on many tasks and duties and become competent in the various things to be done. 1 does not form bonds with householders and monastics in an unsuitable way typical of lay people. And when 1 departs from that monastery, 1 departs without concern. These are the 5 benefits in residing for a balanced period in the same place. So this is one of my favorite suttas, as I always say whenever we do sutta studies. So, but it's true. Every sutta is one of my favorite suttas. It's pretty great, the teachings of the Buddha. But also they're my favorite exactly because they're counterintuitive, especially when I remember the first time or encountered these teachings, they actually very much spoke to me or pretty much highlighted my defilements. In particular, the one on 1 takes on many tasks and duties and becomes competent in the various things to be done. And I was like, wait, what's wrong with that? I'm so competent at doing everything that I'm doing. Look at all the things that I've accomplished in these years. Wait, what is the problem with it? Why is the Buddha saying that that is an issue, right? And usually, I think I shared recently, one of the things that we always are told in jobs, the first job that I had anyway, I remember someone came up to me and was like, you really have to make yourself indispensable, right? So like always be there, making sure so that you don't give your employer any reason to fire you. So in Buddhism, well, we're also not trying to get ourselves fired. But it's more the approach. What kind of approach are we using with our minds? So it's not that certain things are necessarily wrong per se. They're not necessarily bad. But rather, when we have that attitude of making ourselves, for example, indispensable, it comes with a big load of attachment, right? It becomes with a big dose of also self-importance, self-identity. So it becomes, I am the person who, I don't know, started Empty Cloud Monastery. I am the one who knows how the nuts and bolts of the monastery. And, if I leave, then this place will fall apart. I am the only one who knows how to do the social media of Empty Cloud Monastery, or I'm the only one who knows how to do, fill in the dots, or whatever we are doing in our day-to-day lives. And then when someone, for example, even starts taking over certain tasks that we do, it's very typical actually in monastery. I had noticed whoever is in charge of the kitchen, at the very beginning, they're relaxed, but then after a while, they start, especially in Theravada monasteries where you have zero control, it becomes a neurosis for some people. Because usually you'll go there, you'll start setting up your system in order to be very efficient on how the meal prepares. And then out of nowhere, some lay people will show up and throw away everything that you have put together, take over and put their offerings there. I mean, I always found that very amusing, but for some others, actually, that's a big cause of suffering, because they have created that sort of system where they felt comfortable, and that was extremely efficient. But instead, actually, what the purpose is of the kitchen is actually to facilitate the giving of others. It's not to facilitate some fancy kind of system similar to a restaurant in Manhattan, but rather to facilitate the generosity of lay people who support the Sangha. So sometimes we get a little bit confused between what is actually the sort of the purpose of things. Why is it that they exist to begin with, and what is our idea of how things should be, and what is our contribution in all of that. And so when we are living in a sort of spiritual community, we'll see also it's very difficult to just spend some time alone looking at our minds. It's very often very common that people will aspire to monastic life when there's something really bad happening in their lives that they don't want to confront. So we usually see that very often. People will come and like, oh, I need to ordain, I want to ordain. And Bhante actually recently said something along those lines, so I'm probably going to misquote you, Bhante, but I'm going to try my best. Well, actually, monastic life is not about escaping, the issues that we have in lay life, but rather it's about confronting our demons. So when we think we are escaping, or that, oh, I don't have to deal with it, actually, it's quite the opposite. And so whenever we're living in a monastic environment, to a certain degree, we're basically, whether we have robes or not, we're all committed to the same practice. And we'll all be hunted by our demons. We think that we go to the monastery, we're going to have 2 or 3 days of like great sort of real retreat, in the sense of, oh yes, I mean, that was my experience anyway. Remember, I went to Bhavana Society, I was like, oh, so blissful, so great, I'm here in the middle of nowhere, have nothing to do, how lovely. And then after 3 days, I started having the shakiness of like, oh, what am I doing here? What is the point of this? And and what am I doing with my life? And all these different questions that come up. And because actually we are in, most of the time anyway, in noble silence and monasteries, then we have to deal with it. And that can be very unsettling. But also it's actually the great conditions to really investigate the first noble truth, investigate suffering, investigate then the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, understand that there is an end to all of this, and really practice the Noble Eightfold Path. But in order to do that, we need to we need to allow ourselves to actually, take advantage of these opportunities. But what the mind likes to do anyway, is not to deal with these issues. So when we are in a place, then we can start taking on so many different tasks and chores. And then when there are not enough, we create them. We're like, well, there should be more. And so that's, I think, what also the Buddha is pointing out here. One takes on many tasks and duties and becomes competent in the various things to be done. So you start getting into the mind of becoming indispensable rather than dispensable. And sometimes it's actually more about your self-identity rather than what actually is needed in the community, and also how people are even perceiving you, Maybe I think I'm so indispensable here at Empty Cloud Monastery, then tomorrow I leave, and Bhante Sudhasa was like, oh, great. Finally, we don't have Ayya, Soma, with all her ideas of how things should be run and how this is so important to have that, on the schedule today or whatever, right? And so we see how the reality of things is somewhat different from our imagination. And obviously another thing is, once you start spending much time in one single place, we've seen it here. We had no opportunity to leave due to the pandemic. So since we started Empty Cloud, actually we haven't left at all. Like, yeah, I don't think we have we left West Orange? Yes, we have left West Orange like a few days. Basically, it's been a non-stop vasta, right? But in a way, for a year and a half. Yeah, so then it's just the nature of things. You get to know very well the lay people who are around the monastery and who start supporting, and very kind and lovely. But at the same time, also we start accumulating a lot of things. Lots of stuff here in the monastery. And actually, when we first moved in this monastery, there were even more things. That's not because we brought them in, but actually it was an interesting reflection for me to think in Catholic monasticism. One of the main differences between Catholic monasticism and Buddhist monasticism is actually that in the former, usually you ordain in one place and you kind of die in that place. So there's not really an encouragement to leave or an encouragement to explore other, even within the same tradition. So there is more of, in Italian we say clausura, like you're kind of very insular. But in Buddhist monasticism, at least the ones that I tend to gravitate towards, or how the Buddha talks about it in the suttas anyway, there is an encouragement towards wandering. When we started Buddhist Insights, actually, one of the things that people started criticizing Bhante Sudaso for was precisely that he wasn't it was obviously not Asian Buddhist lay people, but other Westerners. I still remember they were like, oh, why did he leave his, the monastery that he was ordained in? And also he has lived in these other monasteries in the meanwhile. That's like really bizarre. And Bhante Sudaso was like, no, actually quite the opposite. It's pretty standard. Actually, here in the West, we tend to have a more sedentary, I seem to understand, sort of lifestyle than in Thailand, where there is much more. Well, if you read also the different biographies of all the different masters, as well as also contemporary senior Western monastics who have, who are the head of different monasteries and lineages here in the West, including Ajahn Pasanno, Bhante Sudaso's preceptor. So yeah, it's very, very interesting and fascinating, right? That then you stay in one place. Well, you start accumulating things. Here at Empty Cloud, we have the practice of not having a room. So that's how we tend to, we have created our own wandering system within the monastery to actually avoid that accumulation. And sometimes it's not even like, actually most of the time, we don't really have precious belongings here, but it's just can be mail, for example, mail that arrives and you accumulate it. Or books. I'm definitely guilty of that. I always end up having a library in my room, and then whenever I have to move the room, then whoa, it's the books that are the biggest thing. But we see the tendency of the mind. That is what is important and very interesting here. Of once again, accumulating all of these different things. And accumulating medicines, accumulating all sorts of different support. I mean, it's not, I would say, a coincidence that here we pretty much every day there is an opportunity to have tonics in the evening. So for people who are, having a hard time, well, not having a hard time, but how do you say, like, if you're following the 8 precepts, so you're not eating after noon, so there are certain allowable tonics that the Buddha gave us. And back at the time of the Buddha, they were very difficult to attain. And actually, if you're wondering, to a certain degree, they are still, like, I mean, not somewhat. You won't have lots of sugar and lots of different things available all the time. And definitely you can't, some of them, you can't, just carry them around unless you have a portable fridge, would be really bizarre. So yeah, you start having a little bit more scarcity, and then more renunciation, more contentment due to that. And one of the charming things of this sutta is one forms bonds with householders and monastics in an unsuitable way typical of lay people. So very important not to take this as disparagement towards lay people, but once again, what is the purpose? Why do we put robes on? So if we are to have the same sort of mannerism or way to go about the world as when we are lay people, so we're lay people with a bunch of robes on, or bed sheets, according to the perception, then what's the point? Well, we might as well have pants, I remember that was the first reflection I had when I first put this robe on. I was like, oh, I miss pants and I miss tailoring. It was so much easier to just get dressed, more comfortable, more practical. I can bow without things falling. Yeah, tailoring, seams have made life more comfortable. So what is the purpose? What is the purpose? What is a reminder of our vows? Every moment, we see it and we're like, oh, I'm a Buddhist monk. See myself in the mirror, I'm a Buddhist monk. So what does that mean? We see it once again, especially in how we are relating to others. So the more we look at senior monastics, we see how it's not that they are in complete isolation and they will not, talk to anyone at all. But rather, when they are talking to others, they're always speaking Dhamma. So Bhante Sumita, who's the most senior monk here, has been a monk for 40 years, is actually an example of this, a living example of this. Very grateful to have him around. Very generous with his time, but constantly talking about Dhamma in every moment. So he doesn't know the nuts and bolts of every single aspect of each one of us, of our lives here at the monastery. And it's totally okay, Nobody has had beer, happy hour with Bhante Sumita or with any of the other monastics, I hope. But right, so we start relating in a different manner when we put these robes on. There's a sutta, I don't remember the name, but where the Buddha actually talks exactly about when we do the opposite as monastics. So then we start crying when lay people are crying, we're happy when lay people are happy. It's not that we shouldn't be happy about good things happening to our lay friends, but rather it's when you get too close to someone, then your happiness depends on them, right? And then they're not capable of helping them out anymore because you're too attached to whatever is going on in their lives, not able to share the Dhamma skillfully. So yeah, it's a balancing act of understanding how to practice in accordance with Dhamma without, being shifted to too much, in isolation. I won't see anyone, or to, every day hanging out and talking about all sorts of things, of different jokes and whatever. It's very easy for me not to do that in the United States because I didn't grow up here, so I have zero terms of understanding of what people most of the time are talking about when they're making small talk. And I don't know the the things that people watch, the advertisements, the pop culture references. It's actually quite amusing because I understand English, so I understand the words, but I have no idea what people are talking about, or when they're quoting movies, or when they're doing things. A few months ago, actually, I remember I was quite amused because usually we're a very international community, so there's not really the conditions to have those types of conversations. But at a certain point, there was a time where everybody was American except for me. And I was so amused because I was thinking exactly that. Wow, I understand each single word, but I have no idea what it actually means. And everybody was having a good time. They were like all laughing. And I was like, I like just do not understand. It could be an entirely different language. Very interesting. So yeah, very easy to be a foreigner. But anyway, the last point is that the Buddha says that once we get into this sort of we stay too long in a place, that we indulge in all of these different behaviors, and then we also leave with the part full of concerns. Actually, I very much relate to this last one. It's like leaving, or like, oh, what happens if the pipes break, or if this thing breaks, or like, who is going to take care of such and such, aspect of the monastery? All of those, trials and tribulations. But for example, Bhante Sumita has been here only for periods of time. Definitely he has none of these issues, right? So everything is quite objective. And when we are traveling too, we see how our mind also becomes more objective towards the different issues that are present in other monasteries. This was very evident to me when, I felt like when we had first started the organization, I was like, wow, there's this endless to-do list. There still is. I like to have to-do lists that are always endless. But the main difference is at the very beginning, I was really trying to go through that to-do list, getting to the end of it, and working endless hours to try to achieve that, because everything was urgent. The deadline, was yesterday. That was in the field that I used to work. I used to joke because everybody was always in sort of anxiety mode in the fashion industry, and the deadline was always yesterday. Like, so there was no time. Like, you have to do everything right now in the shortest amount of time possible. I remember I started traveling in monasteries and kind of seeing a similar tendency, perhaps slightly more relaxed. But my mind was relating to the tasks at hand in a very different way, and going like, oh, well, there's no urgency to do this today, for example. This could totally be done tomorrow during the work period. Like, we don't need some extra time to do that. But what was evident to me was that, I was able to have a third-person perspective, or a detached perspective, because I wasn't there all the time. So I could actually have a good balanced sort of understanding of whether something was urgent. So whether something, the pipes are exploding, so you actually have to deal with it right now, otherwise it'll get worse and the building will flood or whatnot. Or if it's actually something that, we can change this tomorrow, or we can do it during the work period. Bhante Sudas is always very good at that. He has a very good not sense of urgency when it comes to things in the monastery, but it's actually very inspiring and quite a good, it's always been a good learning experience for me. But yeah, the thing is, though, very challenging to have that attitude of mind when you're residing in the same place, but much easier to cultivate that state of mind if someone is, has a sort of balance. So is in a place for a period of time and then leaves. And we see that actually, we can think Okay, well then the Buddha is suggesting for us never to be in one place. And just to go wandering all the time, be literally homeless, as in we're all homeless monastics in the sense that we go out of the home life. And even though we live, for example, at Empty Cloud Monastery, this is not our monastery in the sense that it doesn't belong to Ayya Soma, it doesn't belong to Bhante Sudaso, it doesn't belong to Bhante Sumita, it doesn't belong to Ayya Vimalayani, who is currently here as well. It doesn't belong to any of these individuals. It belongs to the Mahasangha at large. But point being, we can get to the opposite way of doing things and thinking, okay, well, actually, we should be wandering all the time. And we have a few friends who have done that in the past. And actually, in a few suttas before that, the Buddha warns us of 5 dangers that can happen for one who engages in lengthy and unsettled wandering. What 5? One does not hear what one has not heard. One does not clarify what one has heard. One is not confident about the portion that one has heard. One contracts a severe illness, and one has no friends. Oh, the last one is very sad. But actually, the other ones are even more sad if you think about it. So one does not hear what one has not heard, means fundamentally not hearing the Dhamma, not hearing the teachings of the Buddha. And the second one, even more important, one does not clarify what one has heard. So how do we actually make progress? We want to be surrounded by people who are ahead of us in the path. So Kalyanamitta is the entire path, as the Buddha says. So spiritual friends. And obviously the ideal of the spiritual friend is the Buddha. And short after him, anyone who is enlightened, and short after them, anyone who is basically ahead of us in the path and can point us in the right direction. So when we are isolated, we're just by ourselves all the time, then we have no opportunity to ask questions to other practitioners who ideally are ahead of us in the path, but even other practitioners who are not and have actually an investigation of the Dhamma, a conversation on the Dhamma. So that creates the conditions for us to really question our understanding of the suttas. So we don't clarify what we already, what type of doubts we have, which then creates, the lack of confidence. You're like, I don't know. Well, doubt starts insinuating in the mind. Well, does this even work? I'm not sure. Well, maybe actually, sensual pleasures are more reliable than the Dhamma. All sorts of wrong views. Then Mara can come and tempt us, and because there's fertile soil. We also don't hear new Dhamma once again, so there is nothing that perhaps new seeds to plant in the soil. And then, of course, one contracts a severe illness. If you're wandering all the time, then it's very easy to, for example, if you're in this area, contract Lyme disease. That is the biggest, issue that people can have if they're wandering for long periods of time in this area where there's lots of Lyme issues. In Asia, there's all sorts of different tropical diseases. And then one has no friends, as we were saying, very much connected to earlier. So no spiritual friends. Also, who can point out our delusion. One can be in a situation of isolation, where then their delusions become the foremost. And there is no one to admonish them if there is if their conduct is not good, and there is no progress in this Dhamma and discipline without admonishment. It's not something that we should terrible thing. We tend to think, may everybody always praise me, but rather it's actually something that we want to seek. So that's another wonderful thing of being surrounded by other practitioners is that they admonish us, and we look forward to it because it actually points us in towards awakening. All right, so then we see the solution is fundamentally a middle way of not staying too long for long periods of time to the point that then we get attached to it and we deal with it no different than a householder. The nuts and bolts and everything is dependent on us, but at the same time we don't want to be completely alone and sort of a hermit lifestyle and being wandering too much. So it's always finding, it's kind of like this balancing act of not veering too much in one side or the other side. All right, so I think that's all I have to say for this morning. If you have any questions, feel free to type them in the live chat and we'll get to them if I can't figure out what the problems are. Oh, there you go, I figured it out right now. Some technological issues this morning.
Annamayang Dhammakataya Sadhukarang Dadamase.
Sadhu, 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 anumodami. All right. Oh, good to see you, Pasikatara. From Belgium, I think Pasikatara is at Tellurian, if I saw correctly. Hi to Nancy. Hello, Jayanta, good friend who we met in person a few weekends ago. And hello to Michael and Anita, good to see you. And Michael says, so if I understand it, it isn't so much what we do, but how we attach or don't attach to it. Yes, of course, it's always in the end what we do, so not what we have per se, etc. But not having certain things or creating certain conditions then creates a natural sort of effect. If one is very advanced in their practice, then they can, kind of like the Dalai Lama. The Dalai Lama is, can be in an extremely luxurious place without having great hatred and delusion arising in the mind, right? But for the average person, the more, we have this saying in Italian, appetite comes through eating. L'appetito viene mangiando, which is so true. Actually, if you ever go on a sort of water fasting, for example, for a period of time, you'll see that the first 2 or 3 days, like the mind will be completely insane and just wants to eat every single thing that seems edible. But then after a while, then the mind starts calming down, and actually you have no hunger pangs altogether. And then when you return to eating, you will actually gravitate not towards the junk food anymore, not towards the sugar or whatever type of things that seem appealing and I want that, or can we have pizza? But rather you'll actually go towards things that your body needs. You get in tune with your needs rather than your cravings, right? So there is, that was actually before Buddhism that I started noticing that. I was like, oh, how interesting. Now I actually really want to nourish my body rather than just use food as a source of entertainment. And so through these conditions of deprivation, actually we create conditions of liberation. It's kind of like counterintuitive. But yeah, but the more instead we eat, so the more you eat pizza, the more you crave pizza. The least you eat pizza, the least you crave it, paradoxically. Or you can have it without then attaching for it too much. There may be some people here that disagree, but that's my experience anyway. For someone who was very attached to food, actually, and could have food as a layperson in a particular way whenever I wanted, monastic life completely removed this opportunity for me. And yeah, that's one of the progresses that I've made the most. So could I achieve the same sort of non-attachment to food as a layperson? Sure. Have I done it? Not really, because it was very difficult to even conceive the possibility that there was happiness without having proper Italian food, you know, like very difficult to even consider it. But then when Italian food is not present, and I mean Italian like food like in a particular way, specific, where we can be very mental in my country. Yeah, if it's not an option, then you have to, well, first of all, investigate. Why are you so attached to this thing? How many times, you know, do you have to have perfect pasta in your life to see that it's actually ultimately unsatisfying? Well, had it countless times in this lifetime and it still didn't make me happy. And actually, paradoxically, now that I don't have it ever, my mind is so much happier, right? So yeah, of course, how are we attaching and non-attaching to it, but also being realistic in and having faith in the teachings of the Buddha. So practicing, especially the precepts, then allows us to create those conditions of investigation and then of letting go. And Gita says, so is this sutta teaching us not to grasp or hold and have attachments to anything, anyone, or any place? Yes, absolutely. Like with anything that the Buddha tells us. Fundamentally, it's always teachings of non-attachment. And Michael says, can we say then that sympathetic joy must come from the perspective of equanimity if it is to be real? So mudita comes from the perspective of equanimity. I mean, everything that comes from equanimity seems like a good solution, in the sense that with equanimity we see everything closely and clearly. But I don't understand how you say mudita comes from the perspective of equanimity, in the way that mudita to me seems that you can actually also cultivate without necessarily having equanimity in place. But I might be wrong. To the Venerables, have
It's
any?
more the other way around. So practicing mudita then helps you develop equanimity. That's more how I would think of it.
Okay, they seem to be both in agreement, my senior monastics.
You become happy when the others are happy.
Mm-hmm.
Share the happiness with the others, which is more challenging.
And then that helps you let go of your envy and jealousy. And when you don't have envy and jealousy, then equanimity is easier. So that's why sometimes I've heard the Brahma Viharas talked about as like each one supports the next one. Like practicing metta makes it easier to practice karuna. Karuna makes it easier to do mudita. Mudita makes it easier to do upekkha.
Very interesting. Thank you. Yeah, mudita is actually the easiest one for me. So I'm not sure how that came into being, but yeah, very interesting. Also because there is a sutta right after the one that we read where the Buddha talks about miserliness also occurring when we're staying in a place for too long. So that tendency of accumulating not only things, but also like praise, gain, all sorts of things, and even the Dhamma, so that we want to hoard it all for ourselves rather than sharing it. So it's very interesting. It sounds like, if we counteract then that tendency of mind with mudita, so rejoicing in other people's good things, that would be a good way to go for it about it. And Michael says, oh, good to see you, Visaka. Welcome. And Michael says, thought just occurred. I think of happiness as arising in someone rather than someone being happy. I can share it more easily without attachment. Okay, very good. And Anita says, so would you say this is the practice of right effort and right action? I mean, I would say that this is the practice of, well, first of all, right view. So absolutely, when I first read this sutta, for example, as I was sharing, it kind of went directly in opposition to the wrong view that I had, you know, of being, for example, competent, etc., certain ideas that I shared. So yeah, first of all, with anything in Dhamma, we need to correct our view of things. And then from there, of course, there's right intention, and from there, you know, all the other steps of the Noble Eightfold Path. So yes, of course, it entails right effort with everything and right action. Yeah, everything is always a practice of mindfulness, as Bhante Sumita was sharing in detail yesterday, and yeah, and of strength, of virya or appamada. All of this put in together. And Nancy says, is there a sutta online for this? Yes, actually it's on the let me, it should be in the description, but I'm not sure where you see the description, so I'll put it in the comments right here. Okay, and that was the last question. Anything else people want to add or say? All right, then maybe it can be the end for this morning. And then this evening, Bhante Sudasa will be sharing a Dhamma talk on the jhanas. That is on the schedule, but tomorrow morning, even though I think I'm on the schedule, I will remove myself from the schedule and we'll have Bhante Sumita on the schedule, who will be sharing some Dhamma. So you can expect Bhante Sumita to be there, and then we'll have in the evening monk chat as usual. And then next week we'll start with, well, Shifu Simplicity's offerings. So she will start, Shifu Simplicity is a good friend of ours, senior bhikkhuni in the Mahayana tradition, who will be sharing a series of teachings on Bodhidharma, right?
Bodhidharma.
Yeah, Bodhidharma, so very exciting. And then Bhante Sumita here at Anti-Cloud Monastery will start a series as well on the 10 fetters. So we'll have to edit a little bit the upcoming schedule. So you'll see, you'll have everything here. And then we'll have also other monastics. I think actually in 2 weeks, Bhante Kusala will be sharing some Dhamma. Anyway, keep tuned. We'll have several different monastics popping up on the channel. We're very grateful for that. Oh, and Namaranta says, I was thinking that it is the most crucial thing because we identify ourselves with the things we possess, and that makes an I more stronger. Yeah, I mean, for me, actually, it's not necessarily things. I think I was already at a good stage with objects, but definitely like my capacity, my mental qualities, or different things that I think are the true me, you know, the real self, or whatever it is, which actually is even more empty than the actual material things. So we can get, you know, oh yeah, I'm like so superior, so above all these physical things, but actually in reality we have even more defilements in the mind of all our different self-identities. I'm the creative person, I know how to do this and this and that. Yeah, anyway, what was that quote from Ajahn Chah? Most of the practice is
knowing what you should do and not being able to do it.
Knowing what you should do and not being able to do it. But we have the Noble Eightfold Path, so we're practicing, and no excellence can be acquired without constant practice. So we're here all to practice together. All right, so we can end with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. See you all this evening.